The pregnancy test showed positive at the exact moment Olivia Rodriguez realized her husband was trying to kill her. She stared at the two pink lines through the bathroom mirror's reflection while Daniela's voice drifted from the kitchen downstairs. "Trust me, sweetheart. I know what's best." Those 5 words. He used them constantly, like a mantra designed to erase her ability to think for herself. "Trust me, sweetheart. I know what's best." At first, they'd sounded protective, loving even. Now they felt like chains wrapped around her mind, tightening with each repetition until she could barely remember what her own thoughts used to sound like. Olivia's hands trembled as she hid the pregnancy test in her makeup bag. 8 years of marriage, and she was just now understanding that Daniel had been systematically dismantling her sense of reality piece by piece. The realization felt like waking up from surgery to discover someone had been operating on your brain, while you smiled and thanked them for it. "Liv, you okay up there?" Daniel's voice carried that tone of manufactured concern that she'd mistaken for caring for so long. "You've been in the bathroom for 20 minutes. Trust me, sweetheart. I know what's best for your health." There they were again. Those 5 words that had preceded every major decision in their relationship. When she'd wanted to keep working as a nurse after they got married, Daniel had said them while explaining why staying home was better for their future family. When she'd suggested they needed couples counseling last year, he'd used them to convince her the problem wasn't their marriage, but her anxiety disorder that needed medication instead. Medication. Olivia's stomach dropped as pieces began clicking into place. The little white pills Daniel brought her every morning with breakfast. "Trust me, sweetheart. I know what's best for your nerves." She'd been taking them for 6 months, ever since she'd started questioning his increasingly controlling behavior. The pills that made her feel foggy and compliant, that turned her legitimate concerns about their relationship into background noise she could barely hear over. Her own drugged contentment. She'd been a registered nurse for 5 years before Daniel convinced her to quit. She knew what psychiatric medications looked like, knew their effects. But she'd trusted her husband's explanation that her doctor had prescribed them for her anxiety. She'd never questioned why she couldn't remember the doctor's appointment where she'd supposedly received the prescription. Walking downstairs felt like descending into enemy territory. Daniel stood at the stove making breakfast, his movements precise and controlled like everything else about him. He was handsome in the way that had first attracted her, tall, confident, successful in his pharmaceutical sales job. Now his attractiveness felt predatory, like a spider's web designed to lure prey. "There's my beautiful wife," he said without turning around. "I made your favorite. Blueberry pancakes with extra syrup." He set a plate on the counter next to a small white pill and a glass of orange juice. "Don't forget your medication. Trust me, sweetheart. I know what's best for keeping you calm." Olivia stared at the pill, recognizing it now for what it probably was, not anxiety medication, but something designed to make her docile and suggestible. How many mornings had she swallowed it without question while Daniel smiled and praised her for taking care of herself. "Actually," she said carefully, "I've been feeling much better lately. Maybe I don't need the medication anymore." Daniel's smile faltered for just a moment before reconstructing itself. "Oh, honey, you know you can't stop psychiatric medication suddenly. It's dangerous. Remember what happened when you forgot to take it last month? You had that episode where you accused me of hiding things from you." His voice carried gentle reproach mixed with concern. "Trust me, sweetheart. I know what's best for your mental health." The episode he was referring to, she remembered it differently now. She'd found evidence that Daniel had been going through her phone, deleting messages from friends and family. When she'd confronted him, she'd felt clear and angry and justified. But the next morning, after taking her pill, the whole thing had seemed like a paranoid delusion. She'd apologized to Daniel for doubting him. "You're right," she said, picking up the pill but palming it instead of swallowing it. "I don't know what I was thinking." Relief flooded Daniel's face. "That's my smart girl. See how much better you feel when you listen to me." He kissed her forehead with genuine affection, and that was somehow the most disturbing part. He really believed he was helping her. In his mind, controlling every aspect of her life was an act of love. Olivia forced herself to eat breakfast while Daniel discussed his plans for the day. He worked from home now, another change that had happened gradually over the years. First, he'd started working remotely 1 day a week to spend more time with her. Then 2 days. Now he rarely left the house except for essential meetings, always returning with detailed questions about how she'd spent every minute of his absence. "I have to drive to the main office today," he said, checking his watch. "Big presentation. I'll probably be gone most of the day." His eyes studied her face carefully. "You'll be okay here by yourself? You won't do anything impulsive. Trust me, sweetheart. I know what's best for both of us when I am not here to take care of you." "Of course not," Olivia replied, working to keep her voice level. "I'll just read and maybe do some cleaning." After Daniel left, Olivia sat in the silence of their house, a house she once loved, but now recognized as an elegant prison. Every room reflected Daniel's taste, his choices, his gradual erasure of her personality. Her nursing textbooks had disappeared from the shelves years ago, replaced by self-help books about anxiety and codependency. Her favorite artwork had been stored in the garage because Daniel thought it was too stimulating for someone with her condition. She pulled out her phone, realizing with shock that her contact list contained only 5 people. Daniel's mother, their family doctor, who she now suspected was complicit in whatever medication Daniel was giving her, the grocery store, and one remaining friend, Sarah, her former nursing colleague. Sarah answered on the second ring. "Olivia? Oh my God, I haven't heard from you in months." I was starting to worry. Hearing Sarah's voice broke something open in Olivia's chest. "Sarah, I need help. I think my husband is ... double quotes." She paused, struggling to find words for something so unthinkable. "I think he's been drugging me." I think he's trying to control my mind." The silence that followed stretched too long. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice careful and concerned. "Olivia, honey, that sounds like something you should discuss with your therapist. Are you taking your medication regularly? Daniel called me a few months ago and said you'd been having some paranoid episodes. The betrayal hit like a physical blow. Daniel had contacted her friends, her former colleagues, laying groundwork to discredit anything she might say. How long had he been planning this? How thoroughly had he isolated her from anyone who might believe her or offer help? "I have to go," Olivia whispered, ending the call. She stood in her kitchen, pregnant and alone, and starting to understand the true scope of her husband's manipulation. Daniel hadn't just been controlling her behavior. He'd been systematically destroying her credibility, her support system, her very sense of what was real. But for the first time in months, maybe years, her mind felt clear. She hadn't taken the pill this morning, and the fog was lifting enough for her to see the cage she'd been living in. She was going to need every bit of clarity she could get, because she was about to discover that escaping a psychological manipulator was far more dangerous than staying trapped. The pregnancy test in her makeup bag represented more than just a baby. It was proof that Daniel's control over her body was complete. But it was also motivation to fight back in ways she'd never had before. She was no longer just trying to save herself. She was trying to save them both. Olivia had never realized how terrifying clarity could be until she spent a full day without the medication Daniel had been giving her. Every thought felt sharp and jagged, cutting through months of artificial contentment to reveal the reality she'd been living in. By evening, she felt like she was seeing her own life through a stranger's eyes. The house phone rang at exactly 6:30, just as it did every day when Daniel was away on business. He was checking on her, as he always did, under the guise of loving concern. "Hi, sweetheart." Daniel's voice was warm and familiar. "How are you feeling? Did you take your morning medication?" Olivia stared at the pill she'd been carrying in her pocket all day. "Yes, I took it." "Good girl. And lunch? You ate something healthy?" "Trust me, sweetheart. I know what's best for your nutrition." There were those 5 words again, and now she could hear them for what they really were, a verbal leash, a way of making his control sound like caring. "I had a salad," she lied smoothly. In reality, she'd been too nauseous from withdrawal and pregnancy to eat much of anything. "Perfect. I'll be home late tonight. Big dinner with clients. Don't wait up for me, okay? Get some rest." "Trust me, sweetheart. I know what's best for your sleep schedule." After Daniel hung up, Olivia began her investigation. 8 years of marriage, and she was finally going to learn who her husband really was. She started with his home office, a room she'd been subtly discouraged from entering over the years because he needed quiet space for work. The office was meticulously organized, every file labeled and categorized. But it wasn't pharmaceutical sales documents that filled his desk drawers. Instead, she found folders with her name on them, containing detailed logs of her daily activities, mood changes, medication responses, and behavioral modifications. Daniel had been documenting their marriage like a scientific experiment. One file was labeled Baseline Establishment, Month 1 to 6. It contained printed screenshots of her text messages, photos of her taken without her knowledge, and handwritten notes about her personality traits. Subject shows strong independence streak. Responds poorly to direct commands. Requires gradual conditioning approach. Subject. He'd been calling her a subject. Another file, Isolation Protocol, Month 7 to 18, documented how he'd systematically severed her connections to the outside world. He'd recorded which friends to approach with concerns about her mental health, which family members to convince that she needed space to focus on their marriage, which colleagues to tell that she was having emotional difficulties and needed to step back from nursing. The most chilling file was labeled Medication Trial Results, Month 19 Present. Inside were detailed charts tracking her responses to different drugs, dosage adjustments, and behavioral outcomes. The medications weren't for anxiety at all. They were a cocktail of antipsychotics and sedatives designed to make her compliant and confused. But the discovery that made her blood run cold was a folder labeled Future Planning. Inside were documents about life insurance policies he'd taken out on her, research about postpartum depression and suicide rates, and a timeline for something called Phase 3 Implementation. Olivia sat in Daniel's chair, surrounded by evidence that her husband had been conducting psychological warfare against her for years. The man who brought her breakfast in bed was the same man who'd been systematically destroying her mind and documenting the process like a research project. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Daniel. Thinking of you. Remember to take your evening dose. Love you. Evening dose. She'd been taking pills twice a day for 6 months, morning and evening. She found the bottle in their bathroom medicine cabinet unlabeled, filled with small white tablets that looked identical to the morning ones. But when she looked closer, she realized they were slightly different shapes. Daniel had been giving her different medications at different times of day, fine-tuning his control over her mental state. Olivia took photos of everything, the files, the medication bottles, the timeline for Phase 3. She had no idea what Phase 3 entailed, but given Daniel's research into life insurance and suicide rates, she suspected it wouldn't involve her surviving to see her child born. She needed help, but Daniel had poisoned every potential source of support. Her family thought she was having mental health issues. Her former friends believed she was paranoid and unstable. Even her own doctor, Dr. Matthews, whom she'd trusted for years, appeared to be part of Daniel's plan based on the notes she'd found. There was one person Daniel might not have anticipated, her former supervisor from the hospital, Margaret Torres. Margaret had been like a mother to Olivia during her nursing career, someone who'd mentored her through difficult cases and celebrated her successes. But Olivia hadn't spoken to Margaret since quitting her job 3 years ago at Daniel's insistence. The call went straight to voicemail. Margaret, it's Olivia Rodriguez. I know it's been a long time, but I desperately need your help. Something terrible is happening, and I don't know who else to trust. Please call me back. Please." While waiting for Margaret to return her call, Olivia made another disturbing discovery. Hidden in Daniel's desk drawer, wrapped in plastic, was her original nursing license and certifications. Documents she thought she'd lost during their last move. Daniel had been keeping them like trophies, physical proof of the identity he'd stolen from her. Looking at her nursing credentials felt like finding pieces of her soul she'd forgotten existed. She'd been a good nurse, competent and caring. She'd saved lives, comforted families, made a real difference in the world. The woman who'd earned these certifications would never have passively accepted being drugged and controlled by anyone, no matter how much she loved them. Her phone rang. Margaret's name appeared on the screen, and Olivia nearly cried with relief. "Olivia? Honey, what's wrong? You sounded terrified in your message." "Margaret, I need to ask you something, and I need you to believe me even though it sounds crazy. Has anyone contacted you about me in the past few years? Anyone expressing concern about my mental health or saying I've been having problems?" There was a pause. "Actually, yes. Your husband called me about 6 months ago. He said you'd been having some difficulties adjusting to married life, that you'd been having paranoid episodes and accusing him of things that weren't true. He seemed very concerned about you." Olivia's heart sank. Daniel had been thorough, poisoning even this relationship before she'd thought to reach out. "But Olivia," Margaret continued, "I've known you for years. The woman I supervised could handle trauma cases that made veteran nurses cry. You were one of the strongest, most mentally stable people I ever worked with. Something about your husband's call didn't sit right with me." Hope bloomed in Olivia's chest. "What do you mean?" "He knew details about your work history that seemed strange for a spouse to know. Specific patient cases, exact dates of incidents, things that would only be in your employment file. And he asked questions about your psychological evaluations, whether you'd ever shown signs of instability. No loving husband talks about his wife like she's a case study." Margaret had seen through Daniel's manipulation. She was the first person in years to question his narrative instead of accepting it. "Margaret, I think Daniel has been drugging me. I think he's been trying to make me mentally unstable on purpose. I found files in his office documenting everything, and I'm pregnant, and I think he's planning to hurt me. Where are you now?" "At home. He's at a business dinner, but he'll be back later tonight. Listen to me carefully." Margaret's voice turned urgent. "Don't confront him. Don't let him know you've discovered anything. Can you get to somewhere safe? Do you have anywhere to go?" Olivia looked around the house that had become her prison. She had no money of her own. Daniel controlled all their finances. She had no car. He'd convinced her she didn't need one since he drove her everywhere. She had no friends or family who would believe her story. "I don't think so," she whispered. "Then we're going to have to be very smart about this," Margaret said. "And we're going to have to move fast. Because if your husband has been planning something for months, he's not going to wait much longer to execute it." As if summoned by her fears, Olivia heard the garage door opening. Daniel was home early from his business dinner. She quickly hung up the phone and ran to put everything back exactly as she'd found it in his office. But as she tried to close the last file drawer, she realized she'd made a mistake. The folders weren't in quite the right order. Daniel would notice. He noticed everything. She heard his footsteps coming up the stairs, and she knew her time had run out. Daniel was about to discover that she'd found his files, and whatever Phase 3 was supposed to accomplish, it was about to begin tonight. Olivia managed to close the file drawer just as Daniel's key turned in the front door lock. Her heart hammered so hard she was sure he would hear it from downstairs. She slipped out of his office and into their bedroom, grabbing a book from her knitstand and arranging herself on the bed as if she'd been reading all evening. "Lev, I'm home early." Daniel's voice carried up the stairs with forced cheerfulness. The dinner got canceled. One of the clients came down with food poisoning. She could hear him moving around downstairs, hanging up his coat, checking the security system, following his usual evening routine. Every sound felt amplified, like her heightened awareness was picking up details she'd been too medicated to notice before. Daniel appeared in the bedroom doorway carrying a glass of water and her evening pill. The sight of that small white tablet made her stomach revolt now that she knew what it really was. "How was your day, sweetheart?" He sat on the edge of the bed and handed her the glass. "You look a little flushed. Are you feeling all right? Trust me, sweetheart. I know what's best for your health." Olivia took the pill and pretended to swallow it, but this time Daniel was watching more carefully. "Open your mouth," he said gently. "I want to make sure it went down okay." Sometimes pills can get stuck. Terror flooded through her, but she forced herself to comply. The pill was gone. She'd successfully hidden it under her tongue. Daniel smiled and kissed her forehead, apparently satisfied. "Good girl. Now, tell me about your day. Did you do anything interesting while I was gone?" The question sounded casual, but Olivia caught something in his tone that hadn't been there before. A sharpness hidden beneath the concern. "Not really. I read for a while, took a nap, watched some TV." She tried to keep her voice level, but lying to someone who'd been studying her responses for years felt impossible. Daniel's eyes studied her face with clinical interest. "You seem different tonight, more alert. Are you sure you took your morning medication?" "Of course I did. The lie came easier this time." "Why would you think I didn't?" "No reason. Just want to make sure you're taking care of yourself." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Actually, there is something I wanted to discuss with you. I ran into Sarah Martinez at the coffee shop today. She mentioned you called her this morning." Olivia's blood turned to ice. Daniel hadn't been at a business dinner. He'd been checking up on her, verifying her story, making sure she was staying within the boundaries he'd established. "Sarah seemed concerned," Daniel continued conversationally. "She said you sounded upset, maybe a little paranoid. She was worried you might not be taking your medication regularly." His hand moved to rest on her shoulder, a gesture that would have seemed supportive to anyone watching, but felt like a threat. "Trust me, sweetheart. I know what's best for managing your condition." "I wasn't paranoid," Olivia said carefully. I just wanted to catch up with an old friend. Of course, honey. But you know how your mind can play tricks on you when you're not feeling well. Remember what Dr. Matthews said about the importance of routine and medication compliance. Dr. Matthews, another piece of Daniel's network of control. What exactly did Dr. Matthews say? Daniel's expression shifted slightly, like he was recalibrating his approach. He said your condition requires careful management. That missed doses could lead to episodes where you might not be thinking clearly, where you might imagine things that aren't real or feel suspicious of people who love you. The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, that for a moment Olivia almost doubted what she'd discovered in his office. Almost. But the files were real. The documentation was real. And the pregnancy test hidden in her makeup bag was very real. I think I need to see Dr. Matthews, she said. Make an appointment for this week. That's a wonderful idea. Daniel agreed too quickly. In fact, I already called his office this afternoon. After Sarah's call, I was concerned about you. He can see you tomorrow morning. Trust me, sweetheart. I know what's best for getting you the help you need. Tomorrow morning. He was moving faster than she'd anticipated. Whatever Phase 3 involved, Daniel was accelerating his timeline. I'm tired, Olivia said. I think I'll go to sleep now. Of course. Rest is very important for your condition. Daniel kissed her goodnight, but his lips lingered against her forehead longer than usual. Sweet dreams, Liv. Everything's going to be much better soon. The promise sounded like a threat. Olivia waited until she heard Daniel's breathing settle into the rhythms of sleep beside her before slipping out of bed. She needed to call Margaret back, needed to figure out her next move before tomorrow morning's appointment with Dr. Matthews. An appointment she was certain would result in her being involuntarily committed to a psychiatric facility. She crept downstairs to use the landline in the kitchen, but when she picked up the receiver, there was no dial tone. Daniel had disconnected the phone. Her cell phone showed no signal bars, even though she'd had full service earlier in the day. He'd installed a signal jammer. Panic clawed at her throat as she realized how completely trapped she was. No phone, no internet, no way to contact the outside world. Even if she tried to leave the house, she had no car, no money, nowhere to go at 2 a.m. while wearing pajamas. But she did have something Daniel didn't know about, the evidence she'd photographed earlier. If she could find a way to get those photos to Margaret or to the police, she might have a chance. Olivia made her way back to Daniel's office, using her phone's flashlight to navigate in the darkness. She needed to get more evidence, more documentation of what he'd been doing to her. But when she tried to open the file drawers, they were locked. Daniel had secured everything after coming home. A sound from upstairs made her freeze footsteps. Daniel was awake and moving around. Olivia quickly turned off her phone's flashlight and held her breath, listening to him walk across the bedroom floor above her. "Liv?" His voice carried down the stairs. "Are you okay?" "I thought I heard something." She had seconds to get back upstairs before he came looking for her. But as she turned to leave the office, she noticed something she'd missed earlier. Daniel's laptop was still open on his desk, the screen dark but not shut down. Taking a massive risk, she touched the mouse pad. The screen lit up, showing a document titled Subject Termination Protocol, Phase 3. Her hand shook as she quickly photographed the screen, capturing Daniel's detailed plan for making her death look like a suicide brought on by postpartum depression. "Liv, where are you?" Daniel was at the top of the stairs now. In moments, he'd come down and find her in his office with evidence of his plans displayed on his computer screen. There was nowhere to hide, no way to explain what she was doing. But as his footsteps started down the stairs, Olivia realized something that gave her a surge of desperate courage. She was no longer the drugged, compliant woman Daniel had been conditioning for years. She was a registered nurse who dealt with psychiatric emergencies, a trained professional who understood human psychology and crisis intervention. And she was a mother, protecting her unborn child. Daniel appeared in the office doorway, silhouetted against the hallway light. For a moment, they stared at each other in silence, the predator finally face to face with prey who was no longer helpless. "Hello, sweetheart," Daniel said quietly. "Having trouble sleeping? Trust me, sweetheart. I know what's best for helping you rest." But this time, when he spoke those 5 words, Olivia didn't feel compelled to obey. Instead, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: righteous anger at being manipulated and controlled. "I know what you've been doing to me," she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "I found your files. I know about the medication, the isolation, the gaslighting. I know about Phase 3. Daniel's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. The mask of concern was finally slipping away, revealing the cold calculation beneath. "Oh, Liv," he said with what sounded like genuine sadness. "You've stopped taking your medication, haven't you? You're having another episode. Trust me, sweetheart. I know what's best for managing your delusions. Even now, even caught red-handed with evidence of his crimes, Daniel was still trying to manipulate her reality. But the medication fog had cleared enough for Olivia to see his tactics for what they really were. "I'm pregnant," she said. Daniel's mask slipped completely. For just an instant, she saw pure fury flash across his face before he regained control. "That's wonderful news," he said carefully. "But it means we need to be even more careful about your mental health. Pregnancy can make your condition worse. Trust me, sweetheart. I know what's best for both you and our baby. Our baby." The possessiveness in his voice made it clear that he viewed the child the same way he viewed her, as something to be controlled, manipulated, and ultimately disposed of when it became inconvenient. Olivia realized that tomorrow morning's appointment with Dr. Matthews wasn't just about getting her committed. It was about beginning the process that would end with her apparent suicide, and Daniel as the grieving widower who'd tried so hard to help his mentally ill wife. But she also realized something else. Daniel had made one crucial mistake in his years of psychological manipulation. He'd been so focused on controlling her mind that he'd forgotten she still had a body trained in hand-to-hand combat from her nursing school security training, a body strengthened by years of lifting patients and working 12-hour shifts. When Daniel stepped into the office to comfort his delusional wife, Olivia was ready. Olivia's nursing training kicked in the moment Daniel stepped into the office. She'd learned crisis intervention techniques for dealing with violent psychiatric patients, and those skills had never been more crucial than in this moment facing her husband, a man she now realized was far more dangerous than any patient she'd ever encountered. Daniel moved toward her with his hands raised in what appeared to be a calming gesture, but Olivia recognized it as a restraint position. "Liv, you're having a psychotic break. You need to let me help you. Trust me, sweetheart. I know what's best for getting you through this crisis." Even in the midst of being caught with evidence of his murder plan, Daniel couldn't stop using his 5 controlling words. But instead of feeling compelled to submit, Olivia felt clarity wash over her like a cold shower. Every word out of his mouth was calculated manipulation designed to make her doubt her own perceptions and surrender control. "Stop," she said firmly, moving behind his desk to keep furniture between them. "Don't come any closer. I know exactly what you've been doing to me for years, and I know what you're planning to do tomorrow." Daniel's expression shifted to one of patient concern, like he was dealing with a confused child. "Honey, you found some work files and misunderstood them. Your mind is playing tricks on you because you haven't been taking your medication. Dr. Matthews explained this could happen if you went off your pills suddenly. Dr. Matthews is part of your plan," Olivia said. "The medication you've been giving me isn't for anxiety. It's antipsychotics and sedatives designed to make me compliant. You documented everything in files labeled with my name like I was a research subject." For the first time, genuine surprise flickered across Daniel's face. He hadn't expected her to be this articulate, this clear in her accusations. The medication withdrawal had given her back her voice, and he was struggling to recalibrate his manipulation tactics. "Even if that were true," he said carefully, "it was for your own good. You were becoming increasingly unstable after we got married. The medication helped you function, helped you be happy. Everything I did was because I love you." The word love coming from his mouth made Olivia feel sick. "You don't love me. You've been conducting psychological experiments on me. You isolated me from my friends, stole my career, drugged me into compliance, and now you're planning to kill me and make it look like suicide." Daniel stopped pretending. The mask of loving concern disappeared completely, replaced by cold calculation. "You always were too smart for your own good. That's why I had to be so careful with the conditioning process. Other women would have been broken in half the time. Other women." Olivia's blood ran cold as she realized Daniel had done this before. She wasn't his first victim. She was just the latest in a series of women he'd systematically destroyed. "How many?" she whispered. "Does it matter?" Daniel shrugged. "They all ended the same way. tragic suicides of mentally ill women who couldn't cope with their disorders. I'm very good at helping unstable women find peace. He was confessing to serial murder with the casual tone of someone discussing the weather. Olivia realized she was looking at a predator who'd perfected his technique over years of practice, a man who'd turned psychological manipulation into an art form. The pregnancy changes things, though, Daniel continued thoughtfully. Postpartum depression is even more believable than regular mental illness. Society expects new mothers to be unstable. Your suicide will be heartbreaking but completely understandable. I'm not going to kill myself, Olivia said firmly. Daniel smiled, and for the first time, it was genuinely warm. Of course you're not. I'm going to help you, just like I help the others. A little extra medication in your system, a carefully staged scene, a note written in your handwriting about how you can't cope with being a mother. Very sad, but these things happen. He was laying out his murder plan like he was describing a medical procedure. Olivia understood now that Daniel didn't see her as human. She was simply a problem to be solved, a project to be completed. The appointment with Dr. Matthews tomorrow was going to begin your final treatment phase, Daniel explained. He was going to recommend immediate psychiatric hospitalization. You would have been so distraught about being separated from your loving husband that you would have attempted suicide that very night. Tragically, this time you would have succeeded. Every detail had been planned with meticulous care. Daniel had spent months, maybe years, setting up her psychological profile to make her suicide believable. He'd poisoned her relationship so no one would question his version of events. He'd documented her supposed mental illness so thoroughly that even her death would seem inevitable. But you've complicated things by discovering the truth, Daniel said. Now we'll have to accelerate the timeline. Lucky for both of us, I'm very good at improvisation. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a syringe filled with clear liquid. Olivia's nursing background immediately identified it as a massive dose of sedative enough to stop her heart while making her death appear to be an accidental overdose. This will be quick and painless, Daniel said, moving around the desk toward her. Much more humane than what some of the others experienced. I've learned to be more efficient over the years. But Olivia had spent 5 years as an emergency room nurse. She'd been trained to handle violent patients, to defend herself in crisis situations, to think clearly under pressure. And for the first time in years, her mind was completely clear. When Daniel lunged forward with the syringe, Olivia grabbed the heavy glass paperweight from his desk and swung it with all her strength. It connected with his wrist, and the syringe went flying across the room. Daniel cursed and grabbed his injured hand, and in that moment of distraction, Olivia ran. She sprinted through the house toward the garage, knowing the car keys were hanging by the door. But Daniel was faster than she'd expected. He caught her in the hallway, grabbing her arm and spinning her around to face him. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said, his calm facade completely gone now. "I was trying to be kind, but you're forcing me to use more painful methods." Olivia remembered her self-defense training from nursing school. She brought her knee up hard, connecting with Daniel's groin, and when he doubled over in pain, she grabbed the ceramic vase from the hall table and smashed it over his head. Daniel collapsed to the floor, unconscious but still breathing. Olivia grabbed the car keys and her phone, which had miraculously regained signal now that she was near the garage. Her first call was to 911. 911, what's your emergency? My husband has been drugging me and trying to kill me. I'm at 1247 Maple Street. I need police and an ambulance. He's unconscious, but I think he's killed other women. Her second call was to Margaret, who answered despite it being 3 in the morning. Olivia, are you okay? I got away. The police are coming. Margaret, he's done this before. He's killed other women and made their deaths look like suicides. We need to find out who they were. When the police arrived, they found Daniel regaining consciousness and trying to convince them that Olivia was having a psychotic episode. But the evidence in his office told a different story. The files, the medication logs, the termination protocol on his computer, everything painted a clear picture of systematic psychological abuse and murder. 3 months later, Olivia sat in a courtroom listening to the prosecutor detail Daniel's crimes. The investigation had uncovered 4 other women over the past decade, all of them isolated, systematically drugged, and eventually murdered when they became inconvenient. All of their deaths had been ruled suicides at the time, but the patterns were unmistakable once investigators knew what to look for. Daniel's pharmaceutical sales, JOB, had given him access to psychiatric medications and connections with corrupt doctors who would falsify medical records. His charm and intelligence had made him skilled at identifying vulnerable women and gradually destroying their support systems. Each victim had been carefully selected and methodically broken down using the same techniques he'd used on Olivia. The defendant used a consistent pattern of psychological manipulation, the prosecutor explained to the jury. He would identify isolated women, gradually separate them from friends and family, convince them they were mentally ill, and begin a regimen of unnecessary psychiatric medication. When they became suspicious or tried to leave, he would escalate to murder. Dr. Matthews, it turned out, had been taking payments from Daniel for years to provide false diagnoses and prescriptions. The anxiety medication Olivia had been taking was a combination of antipsychotics and sedatives that would have eventually caused permanent brain damage if she'd continued taking it. Olivia's testimony was the most powerful part of the prosecution's case. She spoke clearly and calmly about the systematic erosion of her identity, the isolation from her support system, and the gradual realization that her loving husband was actually a serial killer. The 5 words he used most often were, "Trust me, sweetheart, I know what's best," she told the jury. Those words preceded every act of control, every manipulation, every step in his plan to erase who I was and replace me with someone completely dependent on him. When I finally stopped believing those words, I was able to save my life. Daniel was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The families of his other victims finally had answers about what had really happened to their daughters, sisters, and friends. 6 months after the trial, Olivia gave birth to a healthy daughter she named Hope. She'd returned to nursing, specializing in psychiatric emergency care, and had become an advocate for victims of psychological abuse. She'd learned to recognize the warning signs of manipulation in her patients, helping other women escape before they became victims. Margaret had helped her rebuild her support system, reconnecting with friends and family who'd been told she was mentally ill. Many of them felt guilty for believing Daniel's lies, but Olivia understood how skilled he'd been at manipulation. He'd fooled trained professionals. It wasn't surprising that he'd fooled people who cared about her. The experience had taught her something crucial about the nature of psychological manipulation. Abusers like Daniel didn't just hurt their primary victims, they turned everyone in the victim's life into unwitting accomplices by manipulating their perceptions and responses. Recovery required not just escaping the abuser, but rebuilding trust with the people who'd been deceived along with her. Olivia's support group for survivors of psychological abuse had grown to include dozens of women and men who'd experienced similar manipulation. They met weekly to share their stories, learn to recognize gaslighting techniques, and rebuild their ability to trust their own perceptions. The hardest part, one group member shared, is learning to trust yourself again. When someone has spent years convincing you that your thoughts and feelings aren't valid, it takes time to believe in your own mind. Olivia understood completely. Even now, months later, she sometimes caught herself doubting her own reactions or seeking external validation for decisions. She was perfectly capable of making herself. The psychological damage from Daniel's manipulation would take years to fully heal, but she'd survived. She'd recognized the manipulation, gathered evidence, and escaped before Daniel could complete his final plan. Most importantly, she'd learned to recognize those 5 dangerous words: "Trust me, I know what's best," and the psychological tactics that predators use to control their victims. Her daughter Hope would grow up knowing that love meant respect, support and trust, not control, manipulation, and isolation. And through her work with other survivors, Olivia was helping to ensure that fewer people would fall victim to psychological predators like Daniel. The 5 words that had nearly destroyed her life had ultimately become her mission, teaching others to recognize when someone claiming to know what's best for them was actually planning to hurt them. Just survived a psychological thriller that exposes how manipulators use 5 simple words to control their victims? Subscribe now for more eye-opening stories about the dark psychology of manipulation and control. Share this with someone who needs to recognize these warning signs. Your awareness could save a life. Comment below. Have you ever heard someone use these 5 controlling words on you? Let's discuss the red flags we all need to watch for. Hit that notification bell because recognizing manipulation tactics could be the difference between freedom and becoming someone's next victim.